You're listening to a special 8-part mini-series on leading change in public education, using John Kotter's 8-step framework as a guide for our current moment in schools. In the last episode, we looked at Step 7, sustaining acceleration, the work of building on early wins without drifting backward or pushing people past their limits. Today, we're moving to Step 8, instituting change, and we've stayed grounded in two concrete examples throughout the series: strengthening MTSS and redesigning student support and discipline so staff can sustain the work over time. In this episode, you'll hear how this final step fits into the larger 8-step arc, why it matters when leadership changes and attention shifts, and what it looks like to make a more coherent way of working strong enough to outlast the people who first championed it.
Welcome to Little Bits of TLC, the podcast where we explore the dynamic world of education. Join our host, Heather Volchko, as this season we're exploring what it takes to lead meaningful change in public education through the lens of John Kotter's 8-step framework for change. Across the next 8 episodes, we'll connect each step of Kotter's model to the realities schools face every day. From building urgency and developing a shared vision to sustaining changes over time, we'll explore practical strategies for creating systems that support both students and educators. Drawing from real-world experiences across school systems, each episode is designed not only to introduce new ideas, but to help turn them into actions through discussion guides your teams can use throughout your very own local change processes. If you're trying to lead change in a system that often feels both overloaded and under-supported, you're in the right place. Let's explore how we can create meaningful, lasting change in public education together. This is Little Bits of TLC.
Across the first 7 episodes, the story has moved through a full cycle of change. Urgency helped people see that the current way of working was putting too much strain on adults and leaving students without the consistent support they needed. The Guiding Coalition brought together a cross-role group of people who were trusted and positioned to influence real decisions. A clear vision and a focused set of initiatives answered the question, what are we actually trying to build in our MTSS and student support systems, and what big moves will take us there? A volunteer army expanded the work beyond a small inner circle, inviting many more staff into roles that felt like real opportunities, not just extra duties, removing barriers focused on schedules, policies, forms, roles, data tools, and norms that quietly blocked willing people from acting. Short-term wins gave staff and leaders early evidence that the work was making a difference in both the numbers and in how daily life felt. Sustaining acceleration was about building on those early wins, deepening what worked, spreading it thoughtfully, and avoiding both backslide and overload. Now the focus turns to the final step in Kotter's model, institute change. Kotter describes this step as articulating the connection between new behaviors and organizational success, and making sure those behaviors continue until they are strong enough to replace old habits with systems and processes that reinforce the new way of working. In simple terms, this step is about making the new way the normal way. It asks a hard question. How do we keep this from unraveling when people change roles, when district priorities shift, when leadership turns over, or when the spotlight moves on to something else? In public education, that question is not abstract. Many educators can name a promising initiative from the past that faded after a few years. Maybe it was an earlier MTSS push, maybe it was a behavior framework, a student support redesign, or a new way of organizing interventions. For a time, meetings were held, forms were used, and routines changed. Then a superintendent left, or a principal changed, or a new mandate arrived. Slowly, the language disappeared. Older routines came back. New staff arrived who had never heard the original story. What had once been described as our new way became a memory held by a few people rather than a pattern held by the system. Instituting change is about preventing that pattern. That does not mean freezing every form, script, or meeting forever. It does not mean turning a living system into a compliance machine. And it means embedding the core behaviors, routines, and expectations deeply enough that they survive people's departures and can continue to evolve. That distinction matters, and establishing a change is not the same as over-bureaucratizing it. Leaders do not need to preserve every temporary tool exactly as it first appeared. They do need to preserve the essential logic of the work, the core routines, the key expectations, the protections of time, and the commitments that made the new system better than the old one. One way to think about this step is to ask a blunt question. If every member of your current guiding coalition moved to another role in 2 years, what would remain? Would your initiative continue because it is now part of how the district operates, or would it survive only in the memories and personal habits of the people who built it? That question often reveals the work still left to do. To see what instituting change looks like in practice, imagine a district that has spent several years strengthening MTSS, redesigning Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports, improving the quality of FBAs and BIPs, reducing removal based responses, and trying to make staff work more sustainable. The work has moved through the earlier steps, and there is urgency. There's a coalition, there is a vision. There have been wins. The system has not solved everything, but it is in a better place than it was. Now, the district wants to make sure that these gains do not disappear with the next leadership change. The first place they look is policy and procedure. For several years, much of the MTSS and student support work in this district has been guided by playbooks, training decks, and local agreements. Those have been useful, but they are not stable enough on their own. The district's policy team, working with the coalition, reviews student support and discipline policy. They notice that the current language mentions interventions and supports in general terms, but does not clearly describe the district's multi-tiered approach, the expectation for layered supports, or the commitment to using removal-based practices only when necessary for safety. So they revise it. The updated policy explains in plain language that the district uses a multi-tiered framework for academic, behavior, and social support. It outlines the expectation that concerns move through a clear problem-solving process. It describes the district's commitment to coordinated Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports. And it clarifies that schools are expected to use established structures for support planning before defaulting to reactive or removal-based responses whenever safety allows. This policy does not try to script every meeting. It does something more important, like it gives the work formal standing. When a new principal asks, are we really expected to run these MTSS meetings and support processes? The answer is no longer, well, the previous administration cared about them. The answer is yes, this is how our district approaches student support, and here's where that expectation lives. The second place they look is time structures. Across the earlier episodes, a major theme has been the need to protect time for the work. At first, protected MTSS blocks, Tier 2 planning windows, and problem-solving meetings often depended on individual principals making trade-offs. To institute the change, district leaders write these time structures into annual scheduling guidance. The planning memo that goes to principals each spring now includes explicit expectations about a recurring problem-solving block during the contract day. It identifies windows for data review and support planning. The district also aligns its own demands with those windows. It avoids scheduling competing district activities during the same time whenever possible. That shift affects multiple roles. Principals inherit a calendar template that assumes this work happens. Teachers and support staff are less likely to experience problem-solving time as optional or temporary. Counselors, psychologists, and paras can plan around more stable routines. The third place the district looks is roles and job descriptions. In the early years of change, much of the work may have relied on the initiative of certain people. A principal who really believed in the vision protected the time. A counselor who cared deeply about coherence coordinated plans that were not technically in their job description. A teacher leader stepped in to support grade level teams. A para became the informal keeper of an important hallway routine. That kind of discretionary leadership is valuable, but it is not enough to sustain a system over time. So the district starts to formalize some expectations. Teacher leader roles now include language about supporting grade level problem solving and MTSS implementation. Counselor and school psychologist roles include clearer expectations around coordinated support planning, not just crisis response or isolated service delivery. Assistant principal or dean roles include language about building preventative supports and aligning discipline responses with the district's student support framework. At the central office level, one position now has explicit responsibility for the health of the MTSS and student support system, rather than carrying it only as an informal side responsibility. This matters when people are hired, it matters when supervisors set expectations, and it matters when leadership transitions occur. The fourth place they look is onboarding and ongoing learning. One of the easiest ways for a system to slide backward is for new staff to enter it without understanding the newer way of working. They fall back on what they have seen elsewhere or on what the loudest voice in the building says is normal. To prevent that, the district builds MTSS and student support into its onboarding routines. New teachers, counselors, paras, and office staff receive a simple training of how student support works here. How do you raise a concern? What happens next? Who is involved? What should you expect from the system? New principals receive a leadership version of that training. They review the district's support framework, the meeting structures they are expected to protect, and the role they play in keeping the system coherent. Even new central office leaders receive this grounding. That matters because institutions backslide when new leaders inherit structures they do not understand. The fifth place they look is culture, stories, and symbols. This part is less formal, but it is just as powerful. Culture is shaped partly by what people talk about and what they repeatedly notice. In this district, staff meetings and leadership gatherings regularly include examples of the support system working well, not only crisis reports and not only compliance updates. A teacher might share how a concern raised in September led to a coordinated support plan by October and how that changed a student's trajectory. A counselor might describe how a Tier 2 routine is helping a group of students stabilize earlier in the day. A para might explain how a consistent transition plan has changed the feel of a hallway. Leaders connect those stories back to the larger message. They make it clear that these are not isolated acts of heroism. They are examples of the system working more as intended. Symbols matter too. The one-page MTSS flow is not just distributed once and forgotten. It is referenced in meetings. It is posted where people actually use it. Leaders repeat phrases that reflect the new way of thinking, such as, "We do not rely on superheroes, we rely on systems," or, "If we are seeing the same crisis again and again, that is a sign that the system still needs work." Over time, those phrases help new staff understand what is valued. They also help longtime staff remember what the district is trying to protect. We'll come back in a moment to how leaders notice drift and plan for succession so the work can outlast the people who first led it.
You know that feeling when you've tried everything you can think of and the student is still struggling? Everyone's putting in the effort, but it feels like nobody has the time, resources, or roadmap to figure out what comes next? That's where Threshold Learning Nonprofit comes in. We partner with schools to help tackle the challenges that don't have simple answers. Whether it's supporting a student with complex needs, completing functional behavior assessments, strengthening intervention programs, or helping teams get on the same page, our focus is always the same: practical solutions that work in real schools with real people. We're not here to hand you a binder and disappear. We're here to help schools build the confidence, knowledge, and systems to keep supporting students long after we're gone. If you're listening and thinking, my school could really use something like that, let your administrator know about Threshold Learning Nonprofit or visit our website to learn more, because every student deserves a chance to thrive in schools and beyond. Looking for something that actually fits your life? TLC University is here for that. Each week, we spotlight something different: a webinar with real-world insights, a hangout-style interview, and a hands-on workshop or a Q&A where we answer your questions. It's flexible, it's self-paced, and most come with CEUs. So whether you're looking to grow, reflect, or just listen in, there's something here for you. And it's all in one place: university.thresholdlearning.org. That's where you'll find show notes, professional blogs, a full catalog of ACE-accredited courses, and downloadable resources. It all just keeps growing. So whether you're walking the dog, commuting, or taking a breather between the daily grind, TLC University meets you where you are. Head to university.thresholdlearning.org and check out what's new this week. See you then.
Let's get back to how this plays out on the ground and what it means for your change work this year. Even with strong policies, stable schedules, role clarity, onboarding, and culture work, systems can still drift. That is why instituting change also requires leaders to watch for backslide. The signs are often subtle at first. A protected MTSS block gets repurposed for another topic, and no one says much. An old referral form resurfaces because it is familiar. New staff learn the quickest informal workaround rather than the newer shared process. One school quietly returns to more reactive discipline because the principal is overwhelmed. Staff begin to say things like, "We used to have a system for that." When those signs appear, the response cannot simply be blame. It has to be inquiry, clarity, and correction. District leaders can ask, what is driving the drift? Is the problem a leadership transition, a scheduling squeeze, a competing priorities, a part of the model that was never as clear as it needed to be? Then they can respond accordingly. That might mean revisiting the calendar guidance. It might mean retraining new leaders. It might mean clarifying what parts of the model are non-negotiable and what parts are flexible. That distinction is especially important here. Not every element of the system needs to look identical in every school forever. Some parts can and should flex by context. A middle school may organize support meetings differently than an elementary school. A large campus may need a different staffing pattern than a smaller one, but some parts need to remain stable if the system is going to hold. There must still be a clear path for raising concerns. There must still be protected time for problem solving. There must still be expectations for layered supports and timely follow-up. There must still be leadership attention to reducing fragmentation and over-reliance on removal-based responses. Instituting change means getting clearer over time about what is essential and what is adaptable. It also means planning for a succession. When a principal, a coalition member, or a district leader moves on, the handoff should include this work. Outgoing leaders can share what has been built, what is working, where the tensions still are, and what must be protected. Incoming leaders can be oriented into the story rather than left to discover it by accident. That matters at every level. If a principal changes, building staff should not have to wonder whether the MTSS block still matters. If a district support leader leaves, schools should not have to guess whether the referral process still stands. If a counselor or para who carried important pieces of the system moves on, someone else should understand those routines well enough to continue them. This is one reason documentation matters. Not bloated manuals that no one reads, simple, shared, usable documents, a one-page flow, a brief leadership guide, a calendar template, a short onboarding module, a clear list of roles and responsibilities. And these are not glamorous artifacts, but they are part of what makes change durable. As this final episode comes toward a close, it helps to step back and see the full arc of the series. Kotter's model begins with urgency, recognizing that the current pattern cannot continue. It moves to building a guiding coalition, assembling a group with enough trust and influence to guide the work. It asks leaders to form a strategic vision, clarifying how the future will differ from the past and linking that future to concrete initiatives. It calls for enlisting a volunteer army, creating the conditions for many people to want to contribute. It requires leaders to remove obstacles, clearing the obstacles that slow people down and block progress. It highlights short-term wins, the early visible results that must be recognized and shared. It pushes leaders to sustain acceleration, using growing credibility to keep improving systems, structures, and policies after the first successes. And it ends with instituting change, making the new behaviors and ways of working strong enough to replace older habits reinforced by systems and processes over time. For educational leaders, the message is not that every improvement effort will move through these steps neatly. Reality is more tangled than that. The message is that lasting change requires attention at all of these levels. It is not enough to launch a promising initiative. It is not enough to have a few strong pilots. The work has to become ordinary. Not ordinary in the sense of invisible or unimportant. Ordinary in the sense of reliable. Students entering the system years from now should feel the benefit of what is being built now. Staff entering the system years from now should step into clearer, more manageable routines rather than into a blank slate or a story about what used to exist. That is the aim. And for listeners thinking about how to use this series in real life, these episodes can function as more than a podcast. They can be used as a summer leadership study, a sequence for MTSS or student support teams, or a set of discussion prompts for principals and district leaders trying to lead change efforts more coherently. Kotter's 8th step is a reminder that the goal is not simply to start strong, it is to help a better way of working become durable enough to shape what comes next, even as people, pressures, and contexts change.
This episode wraps up an 8-step journey through John Kotter's change framework applied to public education in this moment. We've moved from urgency all the way to instituting change, making the new way the normal way. If you'd like to go deeper, you can find show notes, transcripts, and discussion guides for each episode at university.thresholdlearning.org. They're designed so you can use this series with leadership teams, MTSS teams, and building level groups as you plan for the coming school year. If you're ready to dig into the underlying theory, John Kotter's most recent book, Change: How Organizations Achieve Hard-to-Imagine Results in Uncertain and Volatile Times, offers the core ideas this mini-series is built on. What you've heard here is one way those ideas show up in the daily work of public schools under real pressure. Thanks for listening, and more importantly, thank you for the work you're doing for challenging students and for the adults who support them every day.
Hey, before you jump back into your busy life, consider following at Threshold Learning TLC on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, and Little Bits of TLC on TikTok, YouTube, and Threads. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider sharing the podcast with a colleague. Personal recommendations are one of the best ways to help other educators discover the show. You can find little bits of TLC on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Just be sure to follow or subscribe on your favorite platform so you never miss a new episode. You can also email us at podcast@thresholdlearning.org. We always enjoy connecting with fellow educators and champions for educational justice. For everything else, including our programs, resources, and professional learning opportunities, visit university.thresholdlearning.org. That's university.thresholdlearning.org. See you there.